IVM.
Welcome to 2020, a new year and a new decade. We are starting 2020 with nationwide protests, anarchy in Uttar Pradesh, police violence, and most recently, a brutal assault on students and faculty at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, with the Delhi police doing nothing to intervene. This is happening after widespread protests against the CAA and the threat of a nationwide National Register of Citizens. A nationwide NRC is an unknown beast of unknown dimensions, but with the next census and a national population register approved by the cabinet recently, decisions need to be taken or reversed soon. To understand what a nationwide NRC could be, we must first understand what the NRC in Assam was like. 33 million people in Assam had to provide proof that they were Indian citizens, and a full 19 lakh residents of Assam were left out of the NRC list that came out in August 2019. These 19 lakh people who have been excluded are not Bangladeshi, but stateless. They are people of all religions, different ethnicities, and as you have heard before, it even includes veterans of the Indian Army. And they are people who are facing a very uncertain future. How did this come about? How can 1 billion Indians prove their citizenship to their local officials when few of us even have our own birth certificates with their names? Journalist Rohini Mohan takes us through Assam's unique history, the NRC process in Assam, and we discuss what a nationwide NRC could look like. Welcome to the Pragati Podcast, a weekly talk show on public policy, economics, and international relations. I'm your host, Pavan Srinath. My guest today is journalist and author Rohini Mohan, who has been reporting extensively from Assam over the last few years, covering what's been happening in the state with the NRC, with foreigners' tribunals, and how so many people are struggling with their citizenship, their freedom, and their very lives at stake. If you speak Kannada, do tune in to the Tale Harate Kannada podcast this week, where we are releasing a 3-part explainer in Kannada on the CAA, the NRC, and the freedom to peacefully protest in India. The link is in the description. We'll start our conversation with Rohini after a short break.
Hey everybody, welcome to another amazing week on the IVM Podcast Network. You know what? Not just an amazing week. This is going to be an amazing year. We're looking forward to all the stuff that we're going to bring you in 2020. Please remember to fill out our survey, ivmpodcast.com/survey. That's going to really help us know what you guys want from us from 2020 as well, right? I mean, we'd really like to hear from you, so please do fill out that survey. It would be very helpful. Also, would like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. We have Intel, Cambly, and Storytel. Also, if you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's a week of milestones. We have a couple of milestones this week. Geek Fruit released the 300th episode this week. What a journey it's been. Join Tejas and Dinkar as they celebrate this milestone by talking about HBO's new hit show, Watchmen. Actually, surprisingly, at this point, Geek Fruit is the second oldest show on our network, so it's definitely a show if you haven't checked out, please do check out. Another milestone that we have is it's the 50th episode of our Kannada show, Tale Harate. So definitely do check that stuff out. And as for the rest of our regular programming, on Cyrus Says this week, Cyrus talks to actor Neil Bhopalam. On Advertising is Dead, Varun is joined by Anto Philip and Shreyas Jain, the founders of Under 25, to talk about how the Under 25 Summit came about and how they're building youth experiences by engaging in unique ways. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet is joined by co-founder and CEO of Terribly Tiny Tales, Anuj Gosalia, and founder of Pocket Aces, Anirudh Pandita. They discuss how they manage the creative versus business conflict at the heart of any entertainment company. On the 50th episode of Tale Harate, Pavan discusses CAA, NRC, and police reforms with Alok Prasanna and Saryu Natarajan, hosts of Ganatantra. They give insights on the current political scenario of the country and its implications on various sections of society. On paperback, Rachita and Satyajit are in conversation with the host of Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav Mamoria, who shares his love of reading books that redefine travel for him. And with that, let's get on with your show.
Hi, I'm Pavan Srinath and welcome to the Pragati Podcast. I'm here with Rohini Mohan. Rohini, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
So we are here actually quite late to talk about a topic that I think should have been a part of all conversations in India, especially the political conversations for the last 4 years or more. We are talking about what's been happening in Assam for several decades and what's really become worse in the last 5 years, which is this whole process of determining who is a citizen or not. and how millions of Indians are already have their citizenship under threat. And we are talking about an NRC type process maybe rolling out across the country where the problem will scale from millions to maybe hundreds of millions. So before we talk about what can happen and how bad things can get and whether this is a problem at all, Rohini, can you give us a sense of what the situation is in Assam today? How many people have their citizenship entirely in question and how many have their freedoms curtailed?
So many of your listeners may already know that there was a National Register of Citizens process that happened in Assam, the Northeast, since 2015. And it took 3 years for the final list to come out. It was one of the most difficult processes that the entire state went through. The entire population gave in their documents going back 50 years because in Assam, to be citizens, you have to prove that you were in the country, and especially in Assam, before 1971, which is the cutoff, which is the day Bangladesh was created. On that day is the cutoff.
So even if you were born in Assam afterwards, unless you could show that your parentage was in Assam before 1971, everything was in question.
Yes, absolutely. It didn't matter at all when you were born. It mattered when your grandfather was born and where.
Right.
So if you had to give documents for which went back 50 years, people were just scurrying all around getting these documents and also getting certain kinds of documents, attesting them and submitting them and going through a process where you also connect the dots between relationships. So you have to show not just papers that you have of your husband or your brother, but you have to show lineage to your father. You can actually show to your mother also, but a lot of times there was confusion. People didn't know that. So this process is something that I reported on for the last 2 years. And when the list finally came out in 2018, it excluded close to 20 lakh people. And this includes people from all communities, religions, they speak different languages, they come from different parts of Assam, and there's several Adivasis, tribal population, there's Nepali speaking people. And this has been a shock for a lot of people in Assam. And interestingly, even Assamese-speaking people have been excluded. And Assamese-speaking people were historically the ones who wanted something like the NRC to exclude all illegal immigrants for who they thought were largely Bengali-speaking people from Bangladesh, Muslims and Hindus. But they found themselves, many of them, excluded from it. And these 20 lakh people now are still waiting for notices as to what they should do next. But what they've been told in the past is that they have to now face trial in the foreigners' tribunals, which are already there since the 90s. And this is another trial where, again, you have to prove with a slightly different set of rules how you are a citizen, where submit more documents. You can bring witnesses this time, which under the NRC you couldn't. And again, if you fail even in that to prove that you are a citizen of India, you will be thrown in detention camp and wait for deportation, which is far more complex than we can ever imagine. But that's where it stands now.
So already you have 2 million people whose citizenship is in question. So does that mean that at least for the remaining, almost 30 million people who are screened in this, are the 28 million people safe, even to begin with?
At the moment, yes, I think the ones that actually gave in their documents, for now, they are safe. Also because now when we are talking about the NRC in the rest of the country, Assam will be excluded. So the ones that didn't get in are in some ways not going to face this question again. But we don't know if there's going to be a population register, whether they will be included or not. Some parts of the government say that they won't be. But yeah, it has been an extremely... but people are involved even in getting those 20 lakh people out. So if you're one person in your family is not a citizen, for now they're under doubt. But suppose they get proved to be, suppose your brother gets proved to be a foreigner in this foreigners tribunal, then all your siblings will be questioned again. Because for now, these people this is how you're linked. Because then if one person's ancestry is in question, all his siblings or all her siblings will also be in question. It's not clear. This is not something I would say right now the focus is on the 20 lakh people who didn't get included.
Even after 4 years of fighting, after filing all kinds of paperwork and proof, even the 28 or so million who have notionally got something, are not safe. And then you have a full 20 lakh people whose very existence is in question. Because it's not like, they are stateless and not necessarily belonging to any other state, right? However, the government or under Indian law, they get declared. So basically, 2 million people are looking to be stateless.
Yeah, I think it's important to explain why stateless and why not Bangladeshi, because a lot of the rhetoric around people getting excluded from the NRC is that they are illegal immigrants and that they deserve to be sent back to the country that they came from. Now, which country did they come from? So people in Assam who have got excluded, they speak all these different languages. You could say that maybe a Bengali is pretending to speak Assamese. I don't know. You could say all sorts of things. Sure. But actually how deportation happens is not based on our judgment of who they are and where they're from, but based on the home country that you're supposed to be from, finding papers of yours in their records which say that you are a citizen of that country. Say that you want to deport someone to Bangladesh, then Bangladesh has to accept that this person is a citizen from Bangladesh, and only then, with mutual agreement between India and Bangladesh, can you deport them. But right now, they are not at all deported. In the past, in the 90s, under the Congress governments in Assam, because they could not deport people who were excluded, who were found foreigners, so-called foreigners, I'm doing, air quotes here. These people could not be sent back, deported, so they were pushed back. That was this horrifying process that even the Congress government in Assam followed, where they were just left off the other side of the border in Bangladesh, across Bangladesh, and told never to come back. And who knows if they came back, who knows if they deserve to be thrown out at all. And this is something that several court judgments have found to be very bad. It's not something that a democratic government should do. And that is literally making somebody stateless by pushing them across the border. But now, even if we do this, or even if we let somebody just sit in a detention camp for years and years with no sense of what is going to happen to them, because they continue to say that they are Indian, then that is a state of complete statelessness, losing all your rights. Your home, your family is left behind, where you grew up for decades, where you were born. You have to leave all of that and just sit in a detention camp.
So now we're 20 lakh people who have a lot of unanswered questions and a very uncertain future ahead of them. How many are actually in a position where they're already in jail, they're already in detention or some other place?
People who were left off the NRC weren't directly thrown into detention camp. There was a lot of misunderstanding about that around the time the NRC came out in Assam. But they're not immediately thrown in detention camp. They're waiting for notices in which they get the date of hearing in the Foreigners Tribunal. Now, and I've reported on the Foreigners Tribunals, which have been in existence for a while, and they are the most biased, opaque, arbitrary set of courts that we've seen. And they don't even deserve to be called courts. They are tribunals, but they are not even headed by judges. They are headed by people who have a few years of experience in the law, lawyers. Nowadays, it could even be, since I think 2 years ago, the government passed a notice saying that it could be any bureaucrat with no judiciary experience whatsoever. And they are looking at documents, many of them asking questions to the person standing across them who doesn't know the answers to questions. I don't think any of us would know the answers to the kinds of questions that are asked in a foreigners tribunal. For example, do you know the age of your father when you were born? Or do you know what was the first place your mother voted in? These are questions people don't know. And if you blink, these are reasons people have lost their citizenship. There are also other reasons where your father, who is, say, 90 years old, or your grandfather, is asked to come as a witness to the Foreigners Tribunal, and he is asked about his, maybe in that time, I guess a lot of people had more than 5 children at least in every community. And then you look at the granddaughter of your 5th daughter and you're asked, what is the name of this child who's standing in front of you? And this 90-year-old man will not know the answer or say the wrong answer most of the time in any part of the country. And a person loses citizenship because you are not recognized by your own grandfather. So this is the reality of the Foreigners Tribunal. And if you don't make it through this Foreigners Tribunal, then you are thrown into detention camp. In this process, even after all of this process, where around 1 lakh people have gone through the Foreigners Tribunal in all these decades, now these 20 lakhs will join them. Of these, the last known data we have, as I said, it's very opaque, the system. The last known data we have is around 1,000 people are in 6 detention camps in Assam. There's a new massive detention camp that's under construction right now, funded by the central government. And that is where they're going to be moved, all these, and then possibly anyone else who's going to come and join them later on.
So this is one of the half-truths and half-lies that are going around, right? Like we've had from the Prime Minister to others claiming that the BJP has built no detention centers since 2014.
I have no idea how these things can be said when they are right there in front of you. And for years now, people have known that there are detention centers. They are not separate detention centers. They are within a district court, but they are called detention centers, and people are kept in the same place along with murderers and rapists and, mobile thieves. But they are kept, that is the detention camp. They are kept there, and they do not even have the rights that prisoners who are convicted murderers have. They can't work. They can't go out. They can't have visitors. All of these you can have only due to the benevolence of a jailer, say. They don't have the rights of prisoners.
And you've also reported on this, how there are people who are meeting their daughters or their mothers after 7 years, 10 years. Even people who are coming out of the detention center, say after 10 years, would have probably met their family once or twice while in detention, so to speak, which sounds harmless, sounds like something that you're supposed to get in school, but you're essentially not even getting the rights of, as you said, a convicted criminal.
Yes, I've met a family who, the entire family was thrown in detention camp. The father was put in a different detention camp, and there's one in Kokrajhar in Assam, which is for women and children. So the mother and her 2 daughters, who were 3 and 5 at the time they were thrown in detention camp, they were there for 9 years. And I met the girls as teenagers earlier this year, and they said that I met them in the village, the long story, and then they finally were able to come out due to the help and generosity of their neighbors who filed petition in the High Court saying that they were wrongly detained. And it turned out the High Court said that they should have not been detained at all. They were wrongly convicted as foreigners. Wow. There was no case definitely not on the women. And the father was wrongly convicted. The documents that he gave should have been accepted, but they were not due to some small clerical errors. So they spent their entire life there. They didn't go to school, those girls, and they didn't know how to talk to other people. They didn't know how to talk, forget boys, they didn't know how to talk to adults. And younger one didn't know how to read. She was taught by the older one who got some years of schooling. And it was heartbreaking to see, and maybe it won't break some people's hearts, but I think this is the kind of thing that if we look at and we put ourselves in their place, if you've lost 9 years of your life, even before you've begun your life, you're a child, exactly. Because of a mistake in the system, that can easily be rectified. And this is not an exception. This is just one of, thousands and thousands of stories. These are common stories in Assam. It was when I went there first to report, and I said, okay, I want to meet some families of people who've been detained. I thought it would be very hard to find, but it was not at all hard to find. And that's like the shocking part of it.
Wow. And so here, clearly, this entire process predates the NRC. Maybe NRC was thought of by some even as a solution to this problem that was there. So we did have the creation of Bangladesh and sort of the end of East Pakistan, and you did have probably one of the largest ever displacement of people in the world has seen probably since World War II. And what's been the problem since then? Like you said, people had to prove that they had ancestry going back to Assam before 1971. What kind of a problem was created? Was there a problem at all from a citizenship and who's living in India point of view?
At the time that the conflict started in Assam, it wasn't about India at all. It was about Assam and Bengal. Okay. And the idea, it was actually a sort of a linguistic, ethnic conflict where the people of Assam who spoke Assamese and also people who are Bodos and Mishing, basically everybody who's non-Bengali, they had different ideas of who belongs in this place. Right. Now we see it as one entire Assamese identity, but for a long time, and even now within them, there are differences. But the basic, so when I say Assamese, I mean all of them now, but at the time it was, when I say at the time, it is in the 60s and 70s, it was an Assamese speaking majority's identity. For a long time, they felt that Bengali speaking people were trying to overtake the Assamese culture. And this came from even older history where I'm only going to stick to the colonial part because there's a history even going further beyond that. But let's say take it from the most recent history. It is an area where there has been massive migration for, centuries. And the most latest wave of migrants were people from East Pakistan, from now Bangladesh. Also before that, Bengal was divided. First you have Bengal being divided, then you have the Pakistan, East Pakistan, then you have Bangladesh, and then you have the creation of Assam. So all of these borders being redrawn had created movements of people. And when the British Raj was here, this was land they wanted to make productive in terms of revenue. So they actually wooed people from Bengal, some few districts, as indentured labor to come and clear forests, to set up farms, fields, and start farming. And then, of course, to make the land more productive. So this also caused another wave of migration where people came in. They were given small pieces of land, and many of them still have those documents, and they started to farm over there. These villages were set up, way back. And after that, over the years, it is also a part where the tribal population has often felt that their resources and their land, and it is all along the Brahmaputra, which is an extremely volatile river, keeps changing course and creating new islands and river islands where people farm. When people live in very hard conditions, it's also flooding all the time. Right. And people live through this and make it a productive life, all kinds of people. But there began this war over resources, war over identity. In some parts of Assam, there were influential, rich, and politically strong Bengali-speaking Hindus who were also, people resented that. And that somehow also mixed with the other end of the spectrum, where you had the Bengali-speaking Muslims who were very poor, at the really low end of the spectrum in terms of their income and their status in the population. All of these were kind of lumped together, and this anti-outsider agitation began, led by the All Assam Students' Union, which sounds innocuous but was an extremely powerful force at the time. Student unions, but populated by people who were from Assam, who believed themselves to be the original inhabitants of the land. And it took violent shape. And one of the worst, at the peak of it in 1983, there was the Nelly massacre, Nelly is a place where there were a large number of Bengali-speaking Muslims. They were accused of being descendants of the migrants and called foreigners and outsiders. And they were massacred. In one morning, around 2,000 people were massacred.
This is when?
1983.
Wow.
So it's not very far away. And this was the peak of it. And after that, to end the violence, there was an accord that was signed between the central government, led by the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, the ASU, which is the All Assam Students' Union president, and the Assam government, which was also led by Assamese nationalist government. And these three together signed an accord which said that we will protect, taking into consideration and addressing the worries and the fears of the Assamese population, which to some extent is legitimate, but it has taken this extremely violent, and it had at that point and continues to be reducing the solution to throwing people out. Till now, the preservation of their identity, preservation of their language, all of those things have not been addressed in more peaceful and less exclusive ways. But those were all part of the accord. And in that accord, this deadline was set that anyone who can prove that he has come before 1971, he was around that area, can be seen as a Assamese and can be seen as Indian also. So at that point, it's really interesting how what is a regional idea becomes an idea of nationality of the country itself. The regional nationalism taking such a massive shape. And now it is bleeding into everything across our country in a way that something that, for example, I don't know, when we talk about people, the fear of the illegal immigrant, they're thinking that they're going to find illegal immigrants in Tamil Nadu and from Bangladesh, right? From Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And it really baffles me. And the census says that in India, we have around 30,000 who have come from Bangladesh. And this exercise in Assam, the NRC, stepping a little back. So after the Assam Accord was signed, one of the things was this cutoff.
And that started the whole foreigner tribunals as well?
The foreigner tribunal came even later in the 90s, and but they set up these there were other tribunals which were called the IMDT. I mean, I'm not getting into those things. They were shut down. The different law. So under the foreigners tribunal, if you are accused to be a foreigner, the onus is on you to prove that you are an Indian, that the state is accusing you wrongly. Earlier, the case was that it was upon the state to prove that you are a foreigner, which is how it is in the rest of the world, and which is how the rest of our laws are, where you are accused and you have to prove your innocence, not that kind of. This is really, you are assumed to be guilty until you prove yourself innocent. So the foreigners tribunal started, and then you had all of these cases going to the foreigners tribunals. People were thrown in detention.
And
earlier there were only 36 foreigners tribunals. They became 100 only in 2015 under the BJP current government. And earlier there were only 36, and they would hear a few cases. When I filed RTIs to see how many cases were heard before.
Right.
Now they are heard in hundreds a week, but earlier they were heard one or two every few months, because there weren't that many cases, or they were not hearing them. They didn't have resources. And if you failed in those foreigners tribunals, then you would be again thrown in detention camp or pushed back, as I said earlier.
Right.
And it was chaos. It was not working. It didn't solve the problem, the fears of the Assamese, which they wanted a proper solution where they would be seeing lots of people being thrown out. They also wanted a solution. The others who were being accused also did not, because they were continuing to face violence every time in pockets where there were Bengali speakers. Bodos would attack them, Assamese would attack them, Ulfa would attack them. There was always this fear that on the street anyone can pull you up and say, prove yourself to be Indian, or ask you to speak in Assamese. So there all these things were happening. So finally,
But all of this
the
violence,
NRC was
sort of by extremist groups and sort of citizen groups, and not necessarily by the state, at least initially.
Yes, but it's always in the state. The police was always watching. And at a lot of times, these investigations have not proven anything. But everyone in Assam knows that this is the influential idea that permeates everyone in Assam. And it permeates the state as well. And as a person reporting there only in the last 3-4 years, I can see that it was new to me. But when I spoke to people who were in government at the highest levels, even when they were speaking off the record, you could see how deep this sentiment, this anti-Bengali and anti-outsider sentiment is, and how deep the fear for their own community. It comes from having this fear being passed on from generations, but it also comes from paranoia to an extent, because there aren't that many people coming now as they were perhaps in the 70s or in the late 60s when there was the partition. So, but those fears remain. They've been passed on from generations, and the solution was just not there. That is what the National Register of Citizens, or the NRC, was supposed to solve. It was supposed to be the solution to end all of this problem, and which is why people, although they feared it, even the ones who were targeted for all these years, waited for it finally as the peaceful technological solution that would end all this violence. And as we know now, as we talked about earlier, it hasn't done that. And the same government that said let's have the NRC and pushed for it very quickly, which was the alliance of the BJP and the Assam Gana Parishad, which is come from the Student Union of Assam.
Okay.
They are now saying that this is dissatisfying. The BJP has been trying to undermine the NRC's list in the Assam Assembly, saying that this is false, because it's quite clear that many of the leaders there in Assam have said very openly, they're one of their top leaders also in BJP, has said that they expected more Muslims to be excluded. But actually the larger number of people to be excluded from the NRC are the Hindus, which is very inconvenient for the BJP. This is an unexpected problem for them.
So the problem with the NRC was that it was not extreme enough, or it was not discerning enough in its extremism, sort of, right? So where they wanted anyone who was found to be Muslim in Assam to basically be denied citizenship? Was that sort of the idea?
I wouldn't say it was a want, but it was a belief. They thought they would be excluded. It was so deep, the belief, that these people are from outside, that they expected that they would be excluded. So when the breakup figures came out about which districts had the most exclusions, it was very interesting to see the reactions, because people were shocked the people in government were shocked that the larger number of exclusions came from areas that had larger Hindu populations of Assamese and Bengali and everybody.
Right.
And in fact, and then came the excuse that, the foreigners, the illegals in the Muslim illegals all have fake papers and somehow they've made it. It was some excuse or the other to not believe the NRC, because it's one thing to have a fear and then to have a system which is going to identify and put a number to your fear. And then when the actual numbers, even though I would say that people do know, and I would also agree that a lot of the people who are excluded are people who just didn't have enough papers and had, bad documentation, which is not their fault. But even if we say that these 20 lakhs are the illegal immigrants, it just didn't match the extent of the fear that people had and the satisfaction they wanted out of this number 50 lakh that people kept talking about, which has come from nowhere. It's unsubstantiated. And if this number was not met, then nothing was going to satisfy them. So suddenly the NRC seemed like a completely wasteful exercise. And now then this talk about the Citizenship Amendment Act, which then is the government keeps trying to separate the two, but the timing and the connections that are being made and the messages that are being given to people who are excluded is that if you are Hindu or you're from any other community other than being a Muslim, you can go and reclaim citizenship. But it's also not easy because, maybe we'll come to that later. But it's not easy for you if you've just gone through a process where you try to prove yourself to be Indian to get the benefit of the Citizenship Amendment Act. Now you have to claim to be from Bangladesh. I don't understand how that's going to work.
Okay. Rohini, thank you so much. Let's take a quick break and come back. So if this is what the NRC means, if this is how blunt it's been, maybe we can talk about how the NRC was in process, what kind of documents people had to provide and what challenges they faced. And therefore, if we think of some version of this working across the country, what would that mean? So we'll take a quick break and come back.
नमस्ते, मैं हूँ सौरभ चंद्रा
और मैं प्रणय कोटस्थाने।
जब महफिल खत्म होते होते दरवाजे के बाहर पुलिया के ऊपर हम दुनिया भर की जटिल समस्याओं को सॉल्व करने में लग जाते हैं तो हो जाती है पुलियाबाजी।
अब आजकल के अपार्टमेंट वालों ने तो कभी पुलिया देखी नहीं होगी, पर आप फीलिंग तो समझ ही सकते हैं।
तो आइए शामिल हो जाइए हमारी पुलियाबाजी में, जहां प्रणय और मैं एक से एक इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक्स की तह तक जाएंगे।
आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस, बिटकॉइन, पाकिस्तान, मेडिकल एजुकेशन, करेंसी क्राइसिस, कभी हम दोनों के साथ और अक्सर स्पेशल एक्सपर्ट गेस्ट की कंपनी में।
सुनिए हमें IVM की वेबसाइट, ऐप या अपने फेवरेट पॉडकास्टिंग प्लेटफॉर्म पर हर दूसरे हफ्ते।
Hi, I'm Pavan Srinath and welcome back to the Pragati Podcast. We are here with Rohini Mohan and we are talking about the NRC process in Assam. Rohini, so if you were a resident of Assam in 2015 and the NRC process has just started, what did that mean for you or your family? What kind of a process did you have to go through to prove that you were a legal resident of India?
It's the joy of documentation. The kinds of things that I think most people would really, really hate doing, which is to gather papers of your entire family. So one of the image that is stuck in my head is of every time I would go to somebody's house, they would take out their files if they were middle class. If they were lower middle class, they would take out a plastic cover and show all the documents. And so what were these documents you had to submit to be part of the NRC? So according to the rules, there were two sets of documents. They were called List A and List B. So the List A documents are the documents that link you to one ancestor. It's called a legacy person.
Okay.
And that person is, say, your great-grandfather, your grandfather, somebody who you can prove was there in Assam before 1971. And, or even earlier than that. So that person may have had land documents. That person may have worked in government, so they may have some ID card from there. They may have birth certificate, very rarely, but they may have a birth certificate. This can be a man or a woman. Large numbers of people stuck to their, mostly it was men who had documentation at the time.
Right.
So they would have this. So that was the List A document. One of the strongest ones was the 1951 NRC, which was only done in Assam, in all of the country.
Okay.
So there was a partial list. And this was digitized by the Assam government, by the NRC, and put online. And in that, if you had your name, basically it was done by election officials who went house to house and wrote down the names of people, including children, who lived in that family. And if those names were there in that list, then they would give you a token now, the digitized number, and you gave that. So that is proof. Of course, this is not there for the rest of the country. This was the main strong document. It was not done in some districts, so people who were from those districts suffered quite a lot because they didn't have this main documentation.
So you had to prove this person's identity and then your relationship.
That is list B. So list B is where you prove your relationship to the legacy person. This is where it's really hard. And this is where complete mess and complete confusion prevailed, because sometimes there were names that changed over the years, and your birth certificate, I found many people who had birth certificates with no name on it because, they gave you a birth certificate if you were born in a hospital, that is.
Right.
And you had to give. And of course, birth certificates, there's this rule that in the NRC that only the birth certificate that was created within a year of your birth was accepted.
Okay.
So if you got a birth certificate after you found out that the NRC has begun, because most people use their 10 standard marks certificate and, never bothered to get a birth certificate. If you got it now, it was invalid. So if you had your original birth certificate and it didn't have your name, it was a problem. But if you had your birth certificate and it had, let's say your name was Neha, and, Neha and your father's name was Burgohain, let's say his name was Anup Burgohain, and Anup was spelled N-A-N-O-O-P. But in Anup Burgohain's documents, it was spelled A-N-U-P.
Right.
He was not your father.
Okay.
So you had to establish in exact, perfect documents, which I don't know how many people have, and definitely they didn't have in Assam. You had to establish the connection between the legacy person and you. So you have to show connection to your father. Your father has to show connection to your grandfather and then to the great-grandfather. And one person has to show 4 or 3 generations of documents to be included in the NRC.
And this is if that legacy person's not alive? Or
even if he is alive.
Okay. So if you can prove that the legacy person and their children and their grandchildren are legitimate, but then the great-grandchild doesn't have the right papers, then they're in trouble again.
The great-grandchild is in trouble, yeah.
Wow.
And once you submit in the NRC one legacy person, and then somehow there was a mess up in the document, and you said, actually, you know what? I have great documents for connecting me to my grandmother. Can I please submit that? You're not allowed. Only one chance for a legacy person. You can choose only one.
Wow.
So you can't change you can submit new documents, but you can't change the legacy person. There's this other problem that women especially women had, who were married before 18. And they did not go to school. And this is not a small number in India, and especially in rural areas. There were lots of women who did not have any documents. And the first time they turned up in any government document was the time they voted. And they turned up in some village panchayat election with their husband's name. So they have no documents that connect them to their father, their grandfather.
Right.
So the NRC came up with a solution in which the women could submit what is called a Gaon Bura certificate, which was that your panchayat head or community head, it is not the elected panchayat head, will say, okay, actually this woman, she got married and so she's come to my village. And then your birth village panchayat head will say she was born here to so-and-so person. And these 2 documents are submitted to show that you are. And around a few months before the list of the NRC came out, there was a draft list. Before that, the NRC official, the head, said that this was a weak document, which meant that, there were lakhs of women who submitted this document, and suddenly their citizenship was in doubt. And, nearly hundreds of thousands of women who did not make it to the NRC have not made it because this document was suddenly considered weak. And they have no option because they had no other documents, and this was the only way in which they could prove any ancestry, and even that was robbed. This is a reality I see repeating itself if there is a nationwide NRC.
And this is something that they said is okay, and then they just declared this document weak.
Yes.
Okay. So who do they submit these documents to? Who decides that this is okay under the NRC?
So in Assam, there was a separate NRC organization. It was running on its own. They had a head who was an IAS officer, and they also had, in every district, in every ward, there would be a local coordinator, and people would submit their documents to that person.
Okay.
And, there would be a local computer operator, usually a young guy who knows to operate the computer. And they would maintain these documents. And all of this was populated to the top. Once the submission of documents happens, it was supposed to be entirely out of the hands of, just bureaucrats who could meddle with your thing. But it was not. It is actually extremely subjective at that initial stage, right, when you submit documents. Compared to several other processes that existed in Assam before, this was relatively better, but it was so bureaucratic. And you would have an official sitting across you who is going to look at these documents and compare the spellings and all of that and say that these spellings are wrong, these are not matching, that it is fake, and they're going to judge. A lot of people say that they can tell whether a document is fake or not, and they said they had their ways. But as I said earlier, if it's so deep in every system, bias, who they believe, who you want to believe, who you don't want to believe, and that person is sitting opposite you and giving you documents, and you get to decide whether this document is fake or not. You can see the power it gives a bureaucrat. And you already are submitting documents that the government has given you with mistakes, right? It's not you didn't write the government document. The government did. And you're still stuck with that bad document. And again, you're sitting across an official who's going to decide your fate. If you didn't get into the NRC, you could reapply to be, it was an appeal process, and then they would have a hearing where they would call, if one person in your family, say, I actually attended a hearing of the NRC where nearly 19 people were called from different districts, all belonged to the same family, because one child who was 6 years old was not included in NRC. Everyone came with panic because they didn't know why they were being called. And all of them had to say that, okay, this niece is in our family, and say, all kinds, so that there's no duplication. They had to all arrive. This is really painful, and they hired a bus. They spent a lot of money. This family couldn't afford it. They didn't have time. An elderly person who was hospitalized couldn't make it, and they were trying to get that person on Skype. It was really, really, it's not a fun process at all. And every small mistake can get you out, and losing citizenship. It seems like paperwork, but it is civil death. You get to do nothing. You get, if you're not even in detention camp, even outside, you're not able to buy land, you're not able to go to school, you're not able to access rights. Your family, there have been people who did not make it to the NRC, who committed suicide because, especially elderly men, because they felt that they were the reason their entire family was robbed of citizenship. They felt guilt, shame. It's a huge responsibility, right? If you're a legacy person.
Right. And to prove these various things, all are the idea that you can ask of this in Assam, where even today, even in the most developed states, we don't have perfect land records. We don't have, maybe we are inching closer to 100% birth and death registry in a few states, but even that is not yet a reality today. The idea that the Indian state has the capacity to carry out such an exercise in a way that it will not deeply infringe on the freedoms of millions of people, unthinkable, right? I
don't know how people can believe even that this is going to be a smooth process. I mean, to get a simple driver's license, to get a simple attestation in your university certificate, my God, the kinds of things we have to do in cities. And I can't imagine. Yes, we do a fantastic election. Yes, that is something that we have been proud of, and we think this is going to be like that. But it is not. Even there, we have so many problems. People don't know how to vote. There's fake voting. Forget that process. It's just, this is giving too much power to the kind of bureaucracy that has caused the problem you're in the first place. And then you have to give the kind of proof that is endless. The questions that you can be asked are endless. Doubt will end only when bias ends. So there's far too much power in the hands of a biased system, and a system that is corrupt, a system that is not willing to buy into you because it has too much power. Right? Buy into your sort of, the system is to exclude people. That is why the system is set up.
Right.
So it is not going to believe you in the first place unless you are somebody who it is biased towards, right? So I think that if we think that an NRC process across the country, although it may be different from how it was in Assam, but even if it involves some amount of documentation where you have to prove anything to be a citizen of India and you have to submit any paperwork, I believe it's going to be chaos. From the nugget of the proof that we have, if you're not going to learn from what happened in Assam, the kind of mental trauma, the amount of money people spent, the kind of running around, life had to be put on standstill. There were marriages that were stopped because someone didn't make the NRC, because you don't want your daughter to marry a guy who's not a citizen, or the other way around. So this real life is put on hold We all have other things that, you want to go to school, you want to go to college, you want to earn money, you want to take care of your elderly parent or somebody who's unwell. Everything has to come to a standstill because you're running around for paperwork.
So if we are talking about this idea of development and development for all, I mean, if you aren't even sure that you are legally allowed to be where you are tomorrow, you can't even imagine about anything like development and thinking about tomorrow and the future, right? When existence is in question. But nevertheless, we find ourselves seeing that as the notional focus of a lot of policies. So here, so if we are looking at some kind of a nationwide NRC, first I want to ask, how is this sort of coupled to the CAA, which has become an act? Now, again, there are people who are saying that, look, the Supreme Court can question the constitutional validity of something like the Citizenship Amendment Act. But how do you see the two as being intrinsically linked for the CAA to work in any meaningful way?
I don't know whether it is ever going to work in a meaningful way because it is discriminatory. I've actually thought long and hard about why the Citizenship Amendment Act is a problem. If I didn't care about Muslims, suppose I was a person who didn't care about Muslims, why should I care, right? Forget that I don't even care about the Constitution. It just makes me feel good if you're going to find people who are persecuted from other countries, Bangladesh, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they happen to be Hindu or Sikh, you're going to give them space in this country, which is fine. It's a benevolent act by a country that is a democracy. You give them space, give them refuge. The first thought that comes to my mind is that India does not have a refugee law. So this is supposed to be the first act of actual kind of giving refuge that we are going to do. And it bothers me that we are being choosy about our benevolence. So set that aside. Now, again, I'm going to be that person who doesn't care if Muslims are not brought in. I've reported in Sri Lanka and I've seen the civil war there. And then you have mass numbers of Sri Lankan Tamils who have been coming and seeking refuge in India because of the persecution they faced in Sri Lanka, which is a Buddhist majority country.
Right.
And those people have this ad hoc system of every 6 months going and getting a stamp and they live in refugee camps. And they have been for long asking for citizenship or some form of it, at least some sense of being a long-term resident in a country where they can feel safe. And they are not included in this law. Then you have Tibetans who've been living here in Dharamshala largely, but also many parts of the north and even in Karnataka. And they will not be included. Some of them over time have the right, because some laws were changed, to, if they want, they can apply to become Indian citizens, and some have if they are born here. But this is not a permanent solution for them. Then we have been talking about throwing out Rohingyas, who are one of the most persecuted community in the world in recent times. And they came to Bangladesh and to India in large numbers to seek refuge. But the same government that wants to bring in some people doesn't want to give refuge to those. So if I look at whether we are being balanced, whether we are including people who are from other communities, we are not. And these are the largest, the communities I mentioned. There is the Sri Lankan Tamils, Tibetans and Rohingyas are already the largest numbers of people. They will total 3 lakhs in our country. Already they're here. And they are not being able to find any kind of permanent or predictable life in India because we don't have a refugee law. Now, coming to how the CAA and the NRC are connected, which is how people think it works, right? And that is how the messaging from the government is that is how it will work. That suppose you are excluded from the NRC, and they don't say this openly, which is why it's confusing, but there is no doubt on the ground level that this is the message, that if you are somehow excluded from the NRC and you happen to be from a non-Muslim community, say I am excluded, right? And I am born a Hindu, my name is very Hindu sounding, and I'm going to be excluded from the NRC. So I am panicking now, what is going to happen to me? Now, I'm supposed to be able to use the Citizenship Amendment Act and then say to the government that I'm a persecuted person from Bangladesh, Afghanistan or Pakistan. I have just spent 2 years or 3, I don't know how many years NRC will take in India, saying that I'm Indian. I have lived my entire life as Indian. My mother tongue is Tamil and Malayalam. And how am I going to say I'm from Bangladesh or Pakistan or Afghanistan? It's ridiculous. How am I going to get the benefit of the Citizenship Amendment Act without lying?
Right.
And I don't know how this process is going to work. There has been some reassurance from the government that actually you don't have to show any papers, that you just have to come. So how are they going to judge that I am a genuine person if I'm not going to show any papers? And I've just submitted papers that you've said you have rejected them and you've declared me as an illegal immigrant. But now you want to include some of people like me. That is, I actually would get included if if the CAA is to my benefit. I should like it, but I don't know how I'm going to say now that I'm actually from any of these 3 countries that are getting the benefit. And I don't know how I'm going to prove any persecution. That's a different level of it. So I don't know. People in South India, people in West India, some parts of Maharashtra, how are we all going to get any benefit from the Citizenship Amendment Act? People from some parts of the Northeast may be able to do something. But I don't understand how this is supposed to actually work in conjunction with the NRC. So I wouldn't rest assured.
And in this, the NRC is a topic and something that's been in the works for at least 2 decades now, right? I mean, it saw its full expression sort of in Assam in 2015. And in parallel, you have also had this idea of the NPR, the National Population Register. And given that it's the time for census, this is the time where governments can do something about it and tie something into the census, right? So what do you think are certain genuine possibilities within the next year that you think a lot of people are worried about and should be worried about? I mean, there's a reason why there's an urgency to a lot of the protests that are also happening, right? So could you sort of help us understand the urgency around this?
One of the best things about covering the protests in the last few weeks has been that people are asking very sound questions and asking questions in such a loud, concerted and peaceful way. I mean, of course, there has been some violence, but large parts of the protests are peaceful. And the questions that are being asked there are questions that the government is trying to answer, actually, but many don't have the answer to it. Some of those questions are, is the National Population Register the first step towards the National Register of Citizens? According to law, it is. The National Population Register would not exist if not for a nationwide NRC. There is the rules that were passed, the citizenship rules in 2003, that say that a National Register of Indian citizens should be created. And in the way in which it should be created, it details that from the population register, there will be some people, if they are considered doubtful citizens, an appropriate remark shall be made by the local official in that column, and they will be called for further inquiry. And this is being understood by officials as, at that point, they will be asked to submit documents. The National Population Register would not exist without this law.
And this would happen alongside
the census, yes.
Okay.
Because it's the Registrar General of India that conducts the NPR. In 2010, it happened. In 2015, they did some verifications of addresses. So what the NPR is just to make a list of the usual residents, people who have lived in a particular area for 6 months. So it sounds innocuous. It's just a list of residents. But in it are some very problematic processes. After this list is made, this list is supposed to be published in a local office for everybody to see. And if anyone has a problem with the person's name included in that list, they can make an objection. Some random person who doesn't like me can say that I am not a citizen, or I'm not, this person is doubtful. Although this is just a residence list. And then I will be asked to show documentation or whatever. That process is not clear.
Right.
But then I will be verified. I have to prove that I am not doubtful or whatever. So this is worrying. This is one of the worrying aspects. The other is that although the census is doing this similar things where they ask you demographic data, it's all aggregated later on. We've been doing it for several years, decades. And that data, if asked for by even a court, according to the law, the census data is a confidential data. It will not be given. It will be anonymized. Right. And that is under the law. There is no law that makes NPR data confidential. Some ministers now are saying that it is confidential, but then they'll have to pass a law saying that they will be making it confidential.
Right. And all this is just happening as sort of rules under the old Citizenship Act, right?
Yes.
I mean, we still don't, if we are actually talking about a meaningful citizenship amendment, and maybe that's a topic for a separate discussion. I mean, it has to start from being born in India is sufficient for you to establish that you are a citizen of India, right? From such sort of common sense things, we need reform, and something spelled out under the law before we start doing specious things just by the rules under the law, right? By starting something like the NPR.
Yeah. India was supposed to be a country, it was decided by the Constituent Assembly, where citizenship will be given by birth. You will get citizenship if you're born here. And that's easy enough. That is what most developed countries across the world do. But over the years, governments have added some things which have especially moved us gradually from citizenship by birth to citizenship by ancestry. Citizenship by ancestry is archaic. It's based on a belief that only some kinds of people belong, that lineage should be there. It is not the sign of an open and free country. There are many ways in which you can apply to be citizen. If you marry somebody who's Indian, you can apply after living here for 11 years. Now it's 6 years or 5 years. You can apply for citizenship if you came here on a long-term, regular visa to work here, and then you can apply for citizenship. There are many ways in which you can apply. But apart from those, for those who live here, if you are in any way illegal, this was inserted that after 87, if even one of your parents is illegal, then you will not be an Indian citizen. So these moved us from what was an easily administrable and morally and constitutionally right system of citizenship by birth to a citizenship by ancestry, which is both extremely hard to administer and check, and also small-minded in terms of its moral and ethical and democratic.
And especially because it's been added as something where the only benefit of adding it is exclusion, right? I mean, it's not like, you have difficulty proving that you're born in the country, therefore if you can prove your ancestry, then you're in. You made it for exclusion, right? And all the other processes, as you described, are processes for naturalization.
Yes.
But that implies that you were not a citizen to begin with. You were the citizen of some other country.
Yes.
And then you got naturalized. And the problem here is that there are lots of people who are not citizens of any other countries, who have been citizens from birth, and they have more things that they need to prove in order to establish this. So in your mind, with this NRC process now, what can be realistically expected, do you think? I'm not asking you to predict what the government will do or not do, but is a statement that the NRC will not happen in the rest of the country, does it hold any weight? Given that the NPR will be rolling out in some form, what can be changed there? So do you think there's some reasonable expectations that we can have that a situation like in Assam will not repeat in the rest of the country? Even a much milder version of that will not repeat in the rest of the country.
I don't know how we can prevent that, but one of the other problems with the NPR is also that when it was first collected, data was collected in 2010, there were 15 questions that were asked. Now when the manual for the new NPR has come out and it has been passed and budget has been allocated, and this will start from April, there are 21 questions. This is something that has been only added in the manual, and it's not there in the previous version of the NPR that was done. This also asks you for your parents' father's and mother's place of birth. It will ask you for Aadhaar, which is voluntary. So I think everyone should know that it is a voluntarily, it's not mandatory. When they ask you, it will seem mandatory, but it's not. Driver's license. And these things these have been added. And this is worrying because it is actually converging a lot of your existing data. So, and there is no proof that there is no law that keeps this data confidential. The government may assure you over and over. So maybe this current government is assuring you, but the NPR is for all of the future. Right. Every birth will have to be added. Every person born in India will have to be added into this list. It's not like giving a national identity card, where national identity card does exist. Often a parallel is made where national identity card for citizens is there in other countries. And they say, why can't we have? A lot of people say that, why can't we have? And apart from the fact that we don't need yet another document or an ID card, which of our many ID cards that we walk around with, the other is that the national identity card is something you apply for in most other countries, right? You apply for it and then you get it. So if a child is born in your family, you apply for a national identity card. There have been countries where this has been problematized. There has been identification, targeting, and violence because of certain kinds of messages that can come from your ID card. But let us say it's an innocuous document. But what some citizenship registry does is that it is listing all people and then giving you an ID card. The government is going to keep all your data and they're all connected. And
Right.
I do not, for one, maybe there are some people who trust our databases in Indian government to not leak, to be protected. And let us say this current government will protect everything. I'm not so sure about the future governments. What kind of technology they'll have, what kind of intentions they will have. There is no law for this data to be confidential. If my driver's license is linked to my Aadhaar, is linked to my father's Aadhaar and my father's driver's license, and is linked to my address, and is linked to everyone who lives in my house, it's also linked to my date of birth, is linked to my gender, is linked to my educational qualification, occupation. I mean, this is stuff that is too much data for a government to have and to connect all together. And once you have an Aadhaar, then yes, maybe that database is secure today, but who knows whether it will be secure 5 years later under different governments. We don't have this. There is no law to protect it. Not that if there is a law, it will be protected. So I would say that the government should not have so much data from us that is all converged in one place. When they're all kept separately, like even the census, they do ask you a lot of questions, but it is kept confidential and it's disaggregated. It's aggregated. There is no separate names or people that you can take out from it, and there are no biometrics related to it. Nothing. Right? This problem existed once. This is pointed out as the NPR being a problem when it was being collected along with the Aadhaar, when the Aadhaar was being issued. That was it both came out at the same time.
Right.
And there was so much from pro-privacy advocates who said that let us not link them. And finally, it was delinked.
Right.
And the NPR was set aside for some time and the Aadhaar went forward. Now with the NRC being something that you're coupling the NPR with, it's the only way in which I see that, because the laws exist, the only ways in which we can sort of move forward in terms of the government is for them not to actually implement this law. It is when you have the will, it is when you want the nationwide NRC that you will implement the NPR. If you don't want the Register of Citizens, then you don't have to implement the NPR. We are happy to be giving answers to the census.
Right. And the census is very importantly an enumeration exercise, right? It's counting, and it's counting at scale for the entire population. And what this will also do is, the moment the counting is for anything other than counting, and your counting will go bad. So I'm not saying census data going bad is perhaps the least worst outcome out of all of this.
Yes.
But what that means is there will be now incentives for people who are recording your census details they have different incentives to record them perfectly and imperfectly, right? And you're creating a new vehicle for people to maybe seek rent if they think that the value of their entering all of your details correctly is of extreme value to you.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah, the stakes are very high.
Right. Currently, a census exercise, the stakes are not very high for you, a citizen who's answering a bunch of questions. You hope that they record it well, and people who are doing this are also trained well, and they hope to do a good job. But suddenly, if there are incentives attached to what this data means, then the whole thing will be very different. And in a eerie way, it is a parallel to what's happening in the US too, where I think more is being asked of the census than just enumeration.
Yes.
And here, given that what has already happened in Assam, I think we should be very worried if the NPR is allowed to go through as it stands.
Yes. And, there may be, in terms of if I have, I'm imagining a census enumerator coming to my house and also who's going to ask me NPR questions. And I'm thinking, what should I do? I have, as a journalist, used census data so much, and it is a statistical exercise that is still of great value to most people. It is the base of so much development, planning and activity in our country. And I want to give data, right, to the person who comes to my house. But I haven't still decided, but a lot of people who don't want to give data, who are saying, I will not give data. Several prominent Indians are saying that they will not give data to an enumerator who comes. And, set aside the fact that, people are calling this anti-national or whatever. But what is the logic behind it? I would say it does make me think about whether I am okay with the government converging all my data, whether I should show documents. And there is some confusing messages coming from the government whether they will ask for documents or they will not ask for documents. And we will only know whether they ask or not when they come to your house. I suppose that will be the really proof in the pudding.
Right. And even the government, if they publish their rules in the Gazette, then we know that that's something.
That is something.
All the rules can be changed at any point by the government.
So most of all, I would say we just have to think about safeguarding stuff. Like we know not to share OTPs in our phones when they come. Like we know not to leave our debit card lying around. Why do we think so much about these things? These are safeguards and self-preserving activities that we do naturally so many of us. I mean, how do we know to cut our credit card into small pieces before dumping it? Not to leave our visiting card lying around. We know these things. And yet we are not thinking as much as we should about giving data and paperwork and connected demographic details of our lives, of our entire family, without real and believable assurances from powerful government about whether that will be safeguarded and what it will be used for. It can be said, they do say it is just for welfare activities to be planned better, but that's where there's always a census for it. It's already there. Do we need the second exercise? So it is for the NRC, for the Citizens Register then. If it is for the Citizens Register, do we really need at this point in time all of this money to be set aside for a Citizens Register? And is this the way to identify illegal immigrants? How often do we do this? Because let us say illegal immigrants love our country and they keep coming and they are going on coming, as many people believe. How are we going to stop that? And how many times are we going to go through this NRC process? If you make it so that if you want to have national ID card, I don't know, if you make it a voluntary thing where you apply and get one, then anyone who wants to get it will go through that process. But if the whole country has to prove themselves, how many times will this cycle repeat itself? Right. These are questions I think we should ask ourselves. And these are questions that protesters, people who are out there asking, people who are maybe not even go on the streets actually. There are people wondering about this, people who have been on the fence, people who really want this process and don't want any illegal immigrants, and they are worried for the national security of the country, are also worried and thinking about whether this is the solution. Is this going to solve illegal immigrant infiltration into our country? Is it going to fix our national security problems?
Right.
I'm not so sure, and they are not so sure. So these are questions at least we should ask ourselves before we find ourselves sitting across an enumerator, or before deciding whether we like the CAA or NRC and which side that means we fall on.
Rohini, thank you so much for coming on the Pragati podcast and talking to us about it. You're absolutely right. I mean, we have only a fraction of Indians having something like a passport, and we know how difficult that is and how many challenges people face in even getting a passport to this day, although that process is streamlined. Now we are talking about something that is probably 1,000 times as big as this, and perhaps the Aadhaar project can match it in terms of scale, but Aadhaar was still, apart from your biometrics, far more conservative in what it sort of asked you for. So the sheer logistical nightmare of this, what it can do to the daily lives of all of us, is something I think we need to really pause and think on. Thank you so much for coming here and talking about what's been happening in Assam. I think those of us who are outside Assam still don't know enough about it, enough as conscientious citizens we need to know. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for staying with us till the end. If you have any questions or comments, do write in to podcast@thinkpragati.com. And hey, if you like the podcast and listen to us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. It'll mean a lot to us. The Pragati Podcast is available on the IVM Podcast app and pretty much every other podcast app and platform. We are there everywhere.
Filter coffee is a fascinating beverage. You need to pick the right beans, blend them in the right proportion, roast them to perfection, and slow brew at the right temperature to get the perfect cup. Which is exactly like great conversations as well. You need to track down the most interesting minds, get them into their zone, and settle down for an unhurried, unscripted chat. And coffee for me is always, always, always best enjoyed with friends. I'm Karthik Nagarajan, and do share my table as I meet some of the most interesting people I know and sit them down for a strong cup of coffee and an even stronger conversation. Join me every Wednesday for a freshly brewed episode. This is not frappe. This is the Filter Coffee Podcast.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
We are from the Open Library Project and we host a podcast called Paperback.
Paperback is a podcast where we engage with stalwarts and experts from various industries, suggesting non-fiction titles that contributed to their journey in a big way.
We've had guests like Anjali Rana, Dr. Marcus Rani, Dr. Swati Lodha, Ambi Parmeswaran, Apurva Damani, and many more on our show Paperback. Find new episodes every Wednesday on IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.